Welcome to Forthright and a special double feature reader feedback edition. After taking a break from recording for most of July, today's reading is a pair of columns on education and some of the feedback they generated. First, a column published July 14, 2022, titled The American's Creed. Who would have thought a simple screenshot of one paragraph of the revised Code of Washington could be a popular social media meme? RCW 28A.405.030 is little changed from the original text included in the 1881 unrevised Code of Washington. But unlike the amusingly anachronistic laws ferreted out by the Law Revision Commission, this one is not obsolete. The current title and text in full. Quote, RCW 28A.405.030 must teach morality and patriotism. It shall be the duty of all teachers to endeavor to impress on the minds of their pupils the principles of morality, truth, justice, temperance, humanity, and patriotism, to teach them to avoid idleness, profanity, and falsehood, to instruct them in the principles of free government, and to train them up to the true comprehension of the rights, duty, and dignity of American citizenship. End quote. Failure to teach these precepts is a misdemeanor for any educator or school board director, unless and until the legislature would like to revise or remove a law that has lasted over 140 years. It's survived many updates, RCW reorganizations and renumbering, most recently in 2003. It's a classic, and it's been rediscovered. One of those sharing the meme was Russell Neff, a concerned parent, former engineer. He sees individual teachers doing good work, but fractures in the structure of our educational system, in part by a loss of focus on the values of morality and patriotism required to be taught under the RCW. Neff is frequently at Lewis and Clark High School, where the halls are filled with history, but he feels the values on the wall at LC are at risk, and now those are seen as flexible too. He shared a photo of a plaque on the wall of the historic school, placed and dedicated by the January 1926 graduating class. The American's Creed. I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. Class of January, 1926. It's a statement recognizing the universal values essential to holding the American experiment in democracy together, even knowing they have always been imperfectly lived out. It's from a time when duties were emphasized as the logical companion to rights. And it's a reminder that not only our nation, but each of the 50 states is sovereign, legally and politically independent of its peers, with all power accruing to the people through frequent, free, and fair elections. The apostrophe in the American's Creed puts responsibility for the I believe statements squarely on the individual. That puts it at odds with many of the more recent additions to curriculum, lumped under the term CRT by protesting parents. Critical race theory is more accurately used to refer to an academic legal framework, but CRT is now shorthand for the applied postmodernism underlying modern curriculum, a philosophy focused on group identities and rights without regard to the duty and dignity of American citizenship. From the book Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity by Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay. Quote, the intense focus on identity categories and identity politics means that the individual and the universal are largely devalued. End quote. And thus the collision between universal values and the requirements of RCW 28A.405.030 to impress on the minds of their pupils the principles of morality, truth, justice, temperance, humanity, and patriotism, with a curricula teaching fluid truth, Modern pedagogy has been infused by a postmodern knowledge principle that denies the existence of objective truth. Feelings are more important than facts. We are no longer striving for a perfect union, one and inseparable, but merely a collection of intersecting identity groups focusing on group grievances. Civilized society requires we agree on a core of universal values. We can start with a simple test by school boards for organizations seeking to partner with schools. How will you advance the principles of morality and patriotism as spelled out in state law? How will you as a community partner add value to the basics? Not just the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but the principles of free government and the responsibilities of citizenship. Parents have woken up, and they'll be holding school boards accountable. And a P.S. For all the teachers and administrators out there doing a tough job well, loving on kids every day and trying to turn out responsible adults who can read, write, and do arithmetic, and think critically, may you be blessed with patience as the policy debates continue. Well, after that column was published, the feedback directly to me was uniformly positive, and I always appreciate hearing from readers. But the piece also drew a series of letters to the editor focused on defending the social justice lens of oppressor versus oppressed for education, and generally attacking what I didn't say. I've often thought it's ironic how today's progressives are the ones fighting the hardest against seeing American history through the lens of progress, an ongoing project to create a more perfect union. One critical letter to the editor was particularly well written. Rosie Jo wanted to be sure I'd seen her letter, and she brought it to my attention on Twitter with the following statement. Felt inclined to write this after reading your opinion piece in the Spokesman. You don't have to agree with me, but I hope this provides some perspective from a student who graduated from Ferris High School last year. So I want to read Rosie's letter. I don't usually read a whole naysayer piece, but it really was well written. It was headlined by the editor for the Letters to the Editor column with Coming to Terms with History in K-12. And Rosie writes, in her opinion piece, States Schools Failing Mandate to Teach Morality and Patriotism of July 14th, Sulani Madsen invokes a familiar debate surrounding the essential question, how should we come to terms with our country's history? Perhaps I should specify, how should we come to terms with the decimation of indigenous peoples, slavery and lynchings of Black Americans, massacres of Chinese Americans, internment of Japanese Americans, forced deportation of Mexican immigrants, the United States' destabilization of countries in Latin America, Asia, and the Middle East, the government's failed response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic. For those like Madsen, the response to coming to terms with history seems to be to turn a blind eye and cover up the real events that stain America's consciousness and self-proclaimed morality. They strive to reject this history altogether and continue to spread historical narratives that portray America as a shining beacon of hope and freedom. Yes, we should strive toward a more perfect union, but America will not be a perfect union until it comes to terms with its history. It cannot move forward until it looks back upon the past and acknowledges its atrocities, crimes against humanity, and hypocrisies. As James Baldwin said, I love America more than any other country in the world, and exactly for this reason I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually. True patriotism does not mean loving a country wholeheartedly without recognizing its wrongdoings. True patriotism forces us to think critically, be critical of America, and strive toward improving it. Rosie Jo, Spokane. Now, to me, it should go without saying, and so I didn't say it, that teaching history requires teaching all of it. And nowhere in my column did I say that we needed to suppress the teaching of history, that we should, I'm accused of turning a blind eye, wanting to turn a blind eye and cover up the real events that stains America's consciousness. Absolutely not. Teaching history requires teaching all of it. So I replied to her on Twitter that it's fascinating to me how so many letter to the editor writers assume teaching morality and patriotism means ignoring bad stuff that happened. It's a straw man argument. And unless there's also good stuff to teach, we might as well disband the country. To which Rosie replied, if you really believe that it's also important to teach the bad stuff, perhaps you should have made that clear in your piece instead of implying that teaching about how certain groups have been marginalized is focusing too much on group grievances. A couple issues with her statement there, but I responded with a question which remains unanswered. Why, Rosie? Anyone who understands teaching history is perfectly aware that you teach all of it. You wrote a good letter. Why didn't you talk about teaching the good stuff? You chose your focus, I chose mine. I haven't got an answer to that one, but I do believe that we have focused too much on group grievances, and that those groups that have been marginalized, those do belong in a good history curriculum, and a good history teacher does bring that up. In fact, my father, who was a history teacher, was really drummed into me, and I realized I had basically a private history tutor my entire life, but really drummed into me that to look for the history that doesn't necessarily make it into the mainstream of the books, and to always be on the lookout for those stories of marginalized groups. That's a whole different conversation for another day. Meanwhile, I had written a column about how focusing on group grievances creates division instead of unity. So yeah, frequent critics of the column, and not just Rosie, complain about what I chose to write about instead of, because they wanted me to write about something else entirely. We have to teach past progress as the basis for future progress, and you can't gauge progress without knowing the stuff that happened that we should not be proud of, that we need to have advanced past. We need a common narrative of hope to build unity. So her letter to the editor and some of the others inspired this follow-up column, which was published on August 3rd in the Spokesman-Review. And my favorite title for it was, "We May Need a Miracle." What better movie to watch in triple-digit temperatures than Miracle, the 2004 retelling of the 1980 U.S. men's Olympic hockey team pulling off a miracle on ice. The Soviets were on a 16-year winning streak for the gold and hadn't lost a game in Olympic competition to anyone since 1968. The American men's team hadn't beat the Russians in 20 years and had been outscored 117-26 in 12 games between 1960 and 1980. Not even the NHL All-Stars could beat the Russians that season. But history was not destiny, and the young American team won the gold medal. It wasn't just the temperature that brought the movie to mind. It was a series of letters to the editor sharing a common theme of negativity towards a column highlighting the words of the Americans' Creed on a plaque dedicated by the Lewis and Clark High School class of January 1926. Pointing out we have an RCW requiring the teaching of patriotism clearly triggered some readers. Good history curriculum teaches failures as well as successes, but it's become a cliche on the progressive side that anyone promoting positive threads in American history must be in favor of suppressing real history. It's a classic straw man attack. Conservative principles don't support teaching only the good and suppressing the bad and the ugly. It's about teaching history in the larger context of a shared creed with a goal of e pluribus unum, out of many, one, the original diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. Unfortunately, the current trend in progressive DEI training and curriculum development is rooted in critical social justice theories which create division instead of unity. Miracle is full of metaphors for making a diversity a strength and overcoming the past, two characteristics of good history instruction. Diversity is only a strength when it appreciates individual contributions, nurtures a sense of belonging, and supports progress towards a shared goal in spite of the past. Coach Brooks knew he had to overcome the human tendency to tribalism to build a team out of a diverse group of ambitious and talented individuals. In the movie, Coach Brooks keeps asking the young men to say their name and who they play for. The answers come back loud and strong. University of North Dakota, Boston College, University of Minnesota, until finally, during a hard night of intense conditioning, the team breaks through the tribalism. Mike Eruzione, United States of America. Coach Brooks does not minimize past failures, how tough their opponents are, or how remote their chances of success as they practice for the Olympics. He also doesn't dwell on it. The focus is on the mission and the team. The opening sequences of the movie plays out over a montage of then current events in the decades from 1960 to 1980. The headlines sound eerily familiar. Rampant inflation, a demoralizing withdrawal from a foreign embassy, presidential scandals, civil rights unrest, war in Afghanistan, out-of-control gas prices, a defiant Iranian regime, election concerns, and worries over who's got nuclear weapons. It includes a speech from President Jimmy Carter that resonates today. The erosion of our confidence in the future is threatening to destroy the social and the political fabric of America. The confidence that we have always had as a people is not simply some romantic dream or a proverb in a dusty book that we read just on the 4th of July. It is the idea of which founded our nation and has guided us in our development as a people. Confidence in the future has supported everything else. We've always believed in a thing called progress." End of his speech. Progress requires teaching patriotism with a narrative that neither ignores past failures or implies a chain of uninterrupted successes. A complete American history has to include the first use of federal troops against citizens, undertaken by President George Washington and his Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, to suppress the Whiskey Rebellion. Fortunately, the insurrection ended without bloodshed. It was an action foreshadowing the divide between rural and urban interests and led to the beginning of the two-party system. A complete history also must include Washington's 1796 farewell address, which warns of the perils of the spirit of geographical and political factionalism already threatening the 8-year-old republic. The writing is a powerful message pleading for unity and was brought out and read before the U.S. Senate during the Civil War to boost morale. Since 1888, the centennial anniversary of the U.S. Constitution, the farewell address has been annually read aloud in the Senate chamber as a reminder of our shared values. It's a good piece of writing which should be at the core of any American history curriculum, and it shouldn't take a miracle to focus on the mission and the team. And that's the point of RCW 28A 405-030 requiring public schools to, quote, impress on the minds of their pupils the principles of morality, truth, justice, temperance, humanity, and patriotism, end quote. Anyone who objects to teaching the good stuff is welcome to lobby for its repeal. Hopefully, there's no constituency for teaching only the bad and the ugly. Again, the response was pretty amazing to that column. And so to wrap up this reader feedback double feature, we must find common ground, seeking well-balanced teaching of history without the postmodernist influence of critical social justice theory, infusing lessons with a focus on what divides us. The positive response to the second column tells me there's still hope. Thank you for joining me today, and if you're interested in being notified when there's new posts up on Substack, you can subscribe to Sulani Madsen on Substack. Hope to see you soon.